So, to be an architect in the UK, like I've touched on in previous videos, you need to start with what's referred to as the Part 1. Part 1 can be undertaken in two ways, really. The first way is through university with just an undergraduate degree, and the other way is through what's referred to as a degree apprenticeship. And I've touched on both these before, but I'm going to start off talking about undergraduates. So if you're purely interested in apprenticeships, I'll leave a note in the description below about where you can skip to in video if you want to, purely hear about apprenticeships. But moving on from that, one thing they both have in common is both need to be validated by the RABA, or Royal Institute of British Architects, to hold essentially what's required under the ARB's criteria. So validation's kind of collaborative effort between the ARB and the REBA. So the REBA will come into universities ensuring that their course structure follows what's set out by the ARB in their required course structure to meet the professional standards needed from a Part 1 course. And that applies to both degree apprenticeships and outright undergraduates. So to begin with, picking your course is going to be the first thing. So understanding how that validation works is key, because when you look at what courses are available, knowing that something's validated holds a lot of sway, especially when it comes to your Part 3. Knowing that you've got an accredited Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 makes it a lot easier when you submit all that information at the final stage. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. What essentially is required in that? Well, that kind of ties into what you're going to experience at university, really. I'm not going to go into it in depth. I will leave a link below to the ARB's requirements for Part 1. But essentially that will feed into what you're going to experience at university. But when it comes to picking your course, first of all, validation's key. Second of all, it's what you want to experience from that. So I would really recommend going out to universities, examining them, understanding how they apply the course structure, because each university is different. Although they've got that same criteria, how they apply that differs. So understanding which method of learning is going to work for you, that's how you want to do that. So going forward, once you've picked your university, congratulations, you get into university, you've got your required grades, that kind of thing. It's worth mentioning, actually, I did previously mention that when it comes to grades, it can be quite competitive, so they will tend to push to have higher entry requirements depending on the university. I'm not entirely sure what it is like these days. I mean, I went to university over 10 years ago now for the Part 1. And the university that I got into on UCAS points, but it was the equivalent of 3 A's at the time. And I think the lowest offer that I received was BCC, requiring one of those to be a science-based A level. Just to take the pressure off a little bit, it doesn't necessarily matter what you study at college. Some universities will have specific requirements that they want you to study at college, but one thing that, if I could sort of have my time again, that kind of thing, I would not put pressure on yourself based on what you read. Knowing what you want to study and what you're going to excel at is probably the most important thing. So picking up a course that you may not be entirely proficient in, like I did, because I'd read that most universities like that, it's probably a very bad idea, because you can end up putting more work in than you need to, really struggle with it, and may not get the required outcome you want from it. So my recommendation to you is study the core subjects that you want to study at A level, and then obviously pick your universities around that. That's kind of a better way of dealing with it. And like I say, with how universities work with having a different course structure, you will find that there's that university out there for you. So moving forward, you go off to university and you go away. The whole university experience for architects is a little different for everyone else. I'm sorry to say. It's not in a bad way, not at all. You will find you've got a lot less free time, and you do find you're kind of thrown at the deep end straight away. I remember when I first started, we had a 2-week sort of long project during Freshers Week and into the week after. For anyone who doesn't know, Freshers Week is usually the introductory week where everyone's getting to know each other, getting familiar with core subjects, that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, we were busy doing projects with the master's students. It was really fun actually, but it did mean that, although we did have the time to go out and enjoy ourselves, settle into the university lifestyle, it was very much a different university experience to everyone else in my halls. So that being said, what kind of things can you expect to study? What things can you expect to learn? Well, more than anything else, the part one, it's there to kind of teach you the fundamentals, to get to grips with architecture before you go out and practice, because that's what you're going to do at the end of those 3 years. You'll go out and do the part one workplace placement. But, you know, what essentially you're required to know in terms of these fundamentals? Well, I think first year they kind of eat you into it a bit, like trying to get to grips with learning, kind of understand the basics of, what architecture is about. But again, these are kind of outlined in the ARBS criteria for validation, but they want you to really be able to understand what's in a building. So it's more than just making something look pretty. It's about how it fits into its context, how it affects how it affects its users, how it affects the people that are going to interact with it, and essentially that's going to be everyone in a way. There's going to be real emphasis on that kind of setting a brief and how you go about dealing with that. As well as that, they'll build up your knowledge behind design as well. So there'll be information on different periods of architectural history, different periods of, well, human history really, and there's going to be a bit of explanation on sort of the fine arts as well, because that does feed into it. These architectural movements, they get inspired by the artistic movements that happen around them. So that'll help develop your understanding of architecture in general and help influence your design style in general, really. And then on top of that, there's going to be this emphasis on the technical as well. So when I say technical, I mean sort of construction details, how your building fits together, that kind of thing. At part one, they kind of develop it year by year. So like I say, when you were your first year, they kind of develop that base knowledge of, what you're looking for in designing a brief. Nice and simple. But also then second year, they'll be like, okay, you've got that brief, you've got that building. How's that building fit together? And then they'll expect certain details out of it, environmental analysis, that kind of thing. And then in third year, something much more grand and much more of a test of your skills, really. So with construction details, they're going to be things like how does joints fit together, how do stairs fit together, how does this is affected by building regulations, that kind of thing. So it's really going to get more in depth as it goes on, but you're going to get introduced to that bit by bit, and how you respond to all of these technical points is going to be tested, really. So it's going to be fun, but it's also going to be very, very, very intense. But moving on from that, you've also got things that you've got to learn about designing in general. So large scale urban design and master planning, that kind of thing. So how do you design something that's large in scale, going to incorporate many different elements in perhaps a small scale, that kind of thing. I mean, for example, referencing my own experience, we did this kind of thing in third year where we had to design in the middle of Brighton a large scale multi-purpose development. So we had residential elements to it, shopping elements to it. I think there were sports elements to it, but you also had these public spaces you had to address, how people interact with it, that kind of thing. And with mine, I think it was optional how you dealt with like a sort of a specific element to it, but I had like a theatre point to it. But overall, it was a large scale urban development, and we had to address that. But again, these kind of things are highlighted in the ARBS criteria. So how a university approaches that is going to differ. But that was how my university dealt with it. So they are quite comprehensive, and there's, like I say, it's one of those things that's just going to develop through each year you go through. So it's kind of multi-layers to it, really. So you're not just going there to draw and design, that kind of thing. There's the finer points behind those design. And I think, just to emphasise it though, design is a big part of the course altogether. I think overall it equates to about half of your overall course marks are going to be design based over the years. And then that's the rest of those marks are going to be broken down into things like drawing units, climate analysis units. So just to sort of add a bit of context to that, how sort of buildings should respond to climate change, how they should respond to the climates around them, how the design of the building can sort of affect microclimates within that. So is your building going to be too hot? Is your building going to be too cold? Is it going to be horrendously affected by solar gain? That kind of thing. You'll probably get some optional units within that, but they will ultimately come back to these required points from the universities. Another thing that happens on architecture courses is you get essentially field trips. We've just had Brexit happen, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with the universities in these, to be honest, but I know that essentially universities kind of encourage you to do the logistical side of things yourself. So hopefully universities are still sort of running with field trips and that kind of thing. I mean, at my university, first year we were off to Paris and France, and we saw a lot of stuff. And obviously one big building that you'll hear a lot of in your undergraduate is Le Corbusier's Villa Savoie. I think that's correct. But we went there and interacted with it, so got that finer understanding of what it was about and that kind of thing. Second year, I went to Berlin, and then third year, I went to Amsterdam. So there's a lot of different places that universities like to go to. But I think ultimately, in the first couple of years, you'll probably be more focused on European countries, places that are relatively easier to get to. And that kind of helps develop your cultural understanding of architecture, so understanding how it's kind of progressed over the years in different countries and then ultimately come back to us. But like I say, it's quite diverse. So to break it down a bit further, what you have in total is you have your design units, which again grow in complexity over the years. So how different sites will affect your building, and again, how you'll be expected to have larger and larger outputs on your projects as well. So explaining those construction points on it. And it will be applying your knowledge, because your construction module will be a separate module, but it'll ultimately come back to your design unit, because it'll be like, right, apply what you've learned in your construction elements to your building. And like I say, around that as well, you'll have like environmental units, and as you're building a design units move forward, applying what you've learned in those one smaller unit to the design unit. And then, like I say, you get other things coming there, so things about drawing, things about history, and understanding the context of buildings is very key, especially when you're putting together a brief. And it helps explain what you're doing and why you've chosen this particular type of architecture. And then just to sort of wrap it up as well, what you tend to get towards the end of things is emphasis on professional practice, how practices work, because that's gearing you up before heading out into your Part 1 work placement, what you can expect to find in the workplace, how giving you advice to apply for jobs really, and interact with architects in practice. So that's going to be fun. And one of the things that Architecture University like to do a lot as well towards the end of each year is they'll sort of showcase work. So you'll probably be asked to put together pieces with your studios of what you've all been doing and that kind of thing. So that's really quite interesting. So that's all kind of gathered into 3 years, and then like I say, you're sort of sent off to do your Part 1 work placement, which I'll deal with in more depth in a video in a few weeks' time. But yeah, so you've got all that. So just to sort of cover it, just as a list, you've got a lot of stuff that's being addressed in the RIBA validation process, which is based on the ARB criteria. And most of your work will be design based, but like I say, it's influenced by everything else as well. And there's a lot to it. But as a student as well, like I say, you don't go into it with a certain mindset based off everything you've read about universities, because like I say, architecture courses, they're very different. And there will also be group work time to time where you'll have to do units with others, because again, that's preparing you for practice, because that's what it's like. You have to work in teams with others, be that in your own practice or as part of a design project as a whole. So, with engineers, that kind of thing. But yeah, moving on to architectural apprenticeships. Like I mentioned before, these are relatively new, and to be honest, I've had to do a bit of research for this video, and having someone in my office who's an apprentice has helped me provide me with some great insight in this. So the Part 1 is addressed in what's referred to as a Level 6 degree apprenticeship, sorry. And again, these have a strict validation by the RIBA, and again, it stems from this ARB criteria. At the minute, there's only a few courses that are validated at the Part 1 stage. But the way this works is it's a bit like part-time study. I probably should have addressed this in my last bit of the video, but part-time study is where you're working and studying at the same time, and usually when you're studying part-time, this will be over a longer period of time. But with the apprenticeship, this is kind of applied throughout, but you're assessed on what you're doing in the workplace as well. And you're required to fill out logs on what you've been doing in practice. And what you do in the workplace will replace some of the modules that you will have been taught. So rather than being taught about something, you're experiencing it firsthand and you're documenting that in logs and reporting that back to your tutors, that kind of thing. And the tutors will also interact with your workplace mentors as well. And when I say workplace mentor, that's someone in the workplace who's kind of guiding you through understanding architecture. So in a workplace, if you're someone junior, you'll report to someone else, and that person will also be sort of evaluating your work. And if they're a mentor, they'll also be providing feedback on that. So I've mentioned before about PDRs, development logs. When you don't fill these out until you're doing a part one work placement. But when you start doing these, you'll have someone in the workplace who's filling out sort of the workplace side of things. This will be someone who interacts with you on the regular, and this is what happens with the apprenticeship as well. Someone will be filling out logs on your performance and giving feedback on that, and that's what gets reported back to your tutors when they come in to talk to the workplace, really. And like I say, this essentially replaces some of the modules that would have been directly taught. And this is over a longer period of time, so you're working and studying at the same time, but you're expected to be studying throughout the year and provide a certain amount of education time during the week. So having spoken to my colleague who's doing the apprenticeship, she told me that the way they're taught at her university is that they're supposed to allocate about 20% of their time for study, 52 weeks of the year. But essentially it's how you apply that. So obviously you'll have weeks where you don't want to be doing so much in terms of Christmas, that kind of thing. I mean, they've got lectures making up some part of it, but if you know you're going to have a week where you're going to be unable to commit as much time, put more work in the week before or after. It's about making up those hours. And I think that's true regardless whether you're doing an apprenticeship or an actual undergraduate. It's putting that time in, because the more work you do, the more you're going to gain from it. And I think that about sums it up. Like I say, it's something that's really worth exploring by university. So if you're looking to do an undergraduate, or whether you're looking to do an apprenticeship, look up the universities, look at what they're doing. One thing about the apprenticeships that I should have mentioned as well is you have to actually have a workplace before you sign up for the apprenticeship. So you can't just apply to do the apprenticeship without having a workplace willing to put you through it, because obviously you need that element of it. I think that sums it up quite nicely. Any questions, please leave them down below in the comments and I'll try my best to respond to them. If you've enjoyed the video, feel like you've gained from it, please like it. Also, if you want to find out more, if you want to know when new videos come out, please subscribe. Until next time, I'll see you later.